September 11th, 2001. It was around 8 o'clock in the morning. It seemed like an ordinary day in the United States. Millions of people were heading to work through the busy streets of New York City. Thousands of employees had already arrived at their offices inside the World Trade Center. Airports were crowded with travelers, and 4 commercial airliners had taken off for their scheduled destinations. No one had the slightest idea that within the next few minutes, the world was about to witness one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in modern history. This tragic event would not only change the United States forever, but would also reshape global aviation security, international politics, and the way the world viewed terrorism. That morning, the first aircraft departed, followed by the second, the third, and finally the fourth. At first, everything appeared completely normal. Passengers were settling into their seats, flight attendants were serving travelers, and the pilots were communicating with air traffic control as usual. However, shortly after takeoff, terrorists hijacked all 4 aircraft. They overpowered the flight crews, threatened the passengers, and took control of the airplanes. Air traffic controllers soon realized that something was terribly wrong. Some flights suddenly stopped responding to radio calls. Others changed their planned routes without authorization, and unusual activity was detected in their flight paths. While authorities were still trying to understand what was happening, people in New York noticed a large passenger jet flying unusually low and extremely fast toward Lower Manhattan. Within seconds, the aircraft slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The impact caused a massive explosion, sending fire and thick black smoke through multiple floors of the skyscraper. Thousands of people watched in horror as flames burst out from the building. People on the streets screamed and ran for safety, while others stood frozen, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. At first, many assumed it had been a terrible aviation accident. Firefighters, police officers, and emergency medical teams rushed toward the burning tower, while thousands of office workers desperately tried to evacuate using the stairwells. Television stations interrupted their regular programming and began broadcasting live images from the scene. Millions of viewers around the world watched as emergency responders worked courageously to rescue those trapped inside. Just when people hoped the worst was over, another passenger aircraft appeared in the New York skyline. This time, millions of people were watching the live broadcast when the second airplane crashed directly into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. At that very moment, it became painfully clear that this was not an accident. The United States was under a coordinated terrorist attack. Panic spread across the country. Airports immediately increased security. Aviation authorities began grounding flights, and government agencies rushed to respond to an unprecedented national emergency. While New York struggled with the devastation, another hijacked aircraft flew toward the Pentagon, the headquarters of the United States Department of Defense. Moments later, it crashed into the massive building, causing another powerful explosion and severe structural damage. The attack confirmed that multiple targets were being hit across the country. Government leaders, military officials, and emergency agencies quickly moved to secure the nation. Meanwhile, aboard the 4th hijacked aircraft, passengers learned through phone calls to their families that other airplanes had already been used as weapons. Realizing the danger, they made the courageous decision to fight back against the hijackers. A desperate struggle took place inside the aircraft as passengers attempted to regain control. During the confrontation, the airplane crashed into a field in Pennsylvania before reaching its intended destination. It is widely believed that the bravery of those passengers prevented an even greater tragedy. Back in New York, the situation continued to worsen. Fires burned intensely inside both towers, trapping thousands of people on the upper floors. Rescue workers climbed upward, while countless office workers struggled to descend through smoke-filled staircases. Thick black smoke covered the skyline, emergency sirens echoed through the streets, and thousands of terrified civilians fled the area. Around the world, millions of viewers watched the heartbreaking scenes unfold live on television. Few could imagine that within a short time, Both of these iconic skyscrapers would completely collapse. Firefighters, police officers, paramedics, and volunteers continued risking their own lives to save complete strangers, despite the extreme danger surrounding them. It had already become one of the darkest days in American history, yet the greatest tragedy was still about to unfold. Within a short time, the intense fires and the enormous structural damage caused by the impacts weakened the steel framework of the buildings beyond its limits. Suddenly, the South Tower began to collapse. What had stood proudly over the New York skyline for decades disappeared in less than 15 seconds, crashing floor by floor into an enormous cloud of dust and debris. The streets were instantly covered in darkness as thick gray dust filled the air. Thousands of people ran in every direction, desperately trying to escape. Police officers shouted instructions, firefighters searched for survivors, and emergency medical teams treated the injured wherever they could. Despite the overwhelming danger, many first responders continued moving toward the collapsing buildings to rescue those still trapped inside. Their courage would later be remembered around the world. Only a short time later, the North Tower also collapsed. Millions of people watching the live television broadcasts could hardly believe what they were seeing. The two iconic towers that had symbolized New York City for decades were gone within a single morning. The destruction left behind mountains of twisted steel, shattered concrete, and thick smoke that covered lower Manhattan. Families across the country desperately searched for news of their loved ones, while hospitals prepared for thousands of casualties. In total, nearly 3,000 people lost their lives, including office workers, airline passengers, pilots, flight attendants, police officers, firefighters, and emergency responders. Citizens from many different countries were among the victims, making it a tragedy felt around the world. For days and weeks after the attacks, thousands of rescue workers, volunteers, engineers, and recovery teams searched through the enormous piles of debris, hoping to find survivors. Sadly, as time passed, the mission became one of recovery rather than rescue. The entire nation entered a period of mourning. Memorial services were held across the United States, and people gathered with candles, flowers, and moments of silence to honor those who had lost their lives. Investigators launched one of the largest investigations in American history to determine exactly how the attacks had been planned and carried out. The investigation concluded that the attacks had been organized over a long period by the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. In response, the United States introduced major changes to national security and aviation safety. Airport security procedures became much stricter than ever before. Passenger screening was significantly expanded. Cockpit doors on commercial aircraft were reinforced. Security agencies improved intelligence sharing, and new emergency response systems were established to reduce the risk of similar attacks in the future. The effects of September 11th extended far beyond the United States. Governments around the world reviewed and strengthened their own counterterrorism policies. Intelligence cooperation increased between many countries, and international aviation standards were permanently changed. Even today, many of the security procedures passengers experience at airports can be traced back to the lessons learned from this tragic day. In New York City, a memorial and museum were later built at the site where the Twin Towers once stood, honoring the victims and preserving the memory of the lives that were lost. Every year on September 11th, families, survivors, first responders, and people from around the world gather to pay tribute to those who never returned home. Although aviation history has witnessed many terrible accidents, the events of September 11th, 2001 were not simply an air disaster, but a coordinated terrorist attack that changed the course of modern history. It demonstrated how vulnerable even the most powerful nations could be, while also revealing extraordinary acts of courage, sacrifice, and compassion shown by ordinary people and emergency responders during unimaginable circumstances. The bravery of the passengers aboard the fourth hijacked aircraft, the determination of firefighters climbing burning stairwells, and the dedication of police officers, paramedics, and volunteers remain powerful reminders of human resilience. More than 2 decades later, the attacks continue to be remembered as one of the darkest chapters in modern history. They serve as a lasting reminder of the devastating consequences of terrorism and the importance of international cooperation, peace, vigilance, and respect for human life. If you found this documentary informative and would like to learn about more significant historical aviation disasters and world events, be sure to support the channel, subscribe for future documentaries, and share your thoughts in the comments about which historical event you would like to explore next.